Welcome back to the ASSertive Podcast. I'm Erica.
I'm Jess.
And we are licensed professional counselors in Texas, reviewing Am I the Asshole Reddit threads to help you learn skills for communication, healthy boundary setting, and assertive interpersonal functioning. Today, we're going to take a look at different communication styles with the post titled, Am I the Asshole for Embarrassing a Stranger in the Shops? The other day, I was in IKEA. I was in line to get some food when this man and his children stood behind me. Well, not so much behind me as on top of me. If I had turned, I would have hit his toddler in the head, and his older child was standing next to me the entire time. I moved forward a step, and he followed me. It got to the point where I ended up at the register, and he was standing next to me. You would have thought we were ordering together with how close he was standing. I wanted to pay with my bank card, and his child was practically on top of the card machine. I looked at the server, who seemed uncomfortable with the situation, apologized to her, and then turned to the man and said, louder than I probably should have, that, considering he was in such a hurry and couldn't allow me to have my turn to order and pay, that he could just go before me. I got a few laughs from the queue, but he glared at me, grabbed his kids, and walked away. I ordered my food, paid, and went to sit down with my own family. A woman approached me a few minutes later and told me my behavior was atrocious. In some cultures, what the man did was normal, and I was being racist and disrespectful. I told her that in my culture, what he did was exceptionally rude, and he was being disrespectful. She huffed something about missing the point and stormed off. My husband said that while he understands my frustration, I did cause a bit of a scene, and I could have asked the man to back up a bit rather than embarrass him. So, am I the asshole?
What do you think?
I mean, of course she's the asshole.
This is what people of the internet, they just put anything out there, like no shame or awareness of how asshole-ish this was.
Yeah, this is what makes me doubt humanity a bit. Like, you thought this was socially acceptable to berate a stranger in line.
A lot of gray areas, I don't know. Maybe she was vindicated. Yeah.
I mean, I think she felt validated because she was getting laughs from the queue. So the people in line behind her and around her. So I think maybe that could have confused her. She got a few chuckles and that made her think this is okay.
Because she's, I guess, implying that like other people recognize that was odd behavior. And we're like, oh, you said something. How weird. Yeah, that's fair. So I think the 4 different characters here all definitely interacted with this situation in quite a different way. From a therapeutic kind of perspective, what's your, I don't know, like the main issues here? What do you think kind of contributed to this odd IKEA situation?
The smaller issue, I think, is that we're at IKEA. That makes it sound like IKEA is bad. I shouldn't have left that pause there. But, we're out in public. Maybe it's our day off, so we have stress from the whole week just kind of on our shoulders. Here we are trying to do an errand.
Mm-hmm.
So there could be some behind the scenes shit going on.
That's true. And like
what I mean by like, yes,
right, IKEA. Like the scheme of IKEA, you're kind of doing errands, but you're kind of also prepared that like you're going to be there for a full day, and it's a mix between like Disney World and like the grocery store. It's a little more than an errand, but it's not quite like a full-blown adventure. So I'm sure a lot of people go in there with like different intentions for the day. That too. Yeah. So I think this is a really good example to talk about like the different kind of communication styles. Do you want to take us through that, Erica?
Absolutely. This is what I would say are the bigger issues going on, is everybody's probably leaning into their own natural communication styles. So maybe that's a good place to preface, is that I think we all have a natural communication style. And if our natural communication style isn't healthy, we have to work really hard to achieve that assertive communication.
Yeah, good point.
That also means when we're at our worst or we're having a tough day, we're reverting back to probably old patterns. So we're using a less healthy communication style.
Yeah.
So we break communication styles down into 4 parts. First one I'll start with is passive communicators. They don't speak up a lot for themselves. They tend to brush off their needs and wants. Their main focus is really just to keep the peace. They don't want to rock the boat, hurt anybody's feelings. These tend to be more people pleaser personalities.
Mm-hmm.
They just want things to go smooth, and they'll suck up quite a lot to keep the peace.
Yeah.
And then we go into aggressive communicators.
Mm-hmm.
Aggressive communicators definitely want to be heard. So they are going to use their voice. They're going to speak up for their wants and their needs. They're going to say what's on their mind, even if they're not saying it in a really tactful way. Be like, ew, I don't like those shoes. Right? So they're not necessarily having to say mean or aggressive things. It's the manner in which they say them is often the aggressive piece of that.
Mm-hmm.
Then we get passive aggressive communicators, which is kind of the worst parts of both of those, just kind of married together. So they tend to be very passive and indirect in what they really need and want, but very loud and vocal in some vaguely related way.
Mm-hmm.
And in their head, it makes sense. But their needs often go unmet because nobody else can really follow that train of thought and figure out, oh, when they're saying this passive aggressive thing, what they actually need from me is this over here.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Then we have our goal communication style, which is the assertive style. They are going to speak up for their wants and their needs, but they're going to do it in a way that's respectful of others. They don't feel the need to lie to you, but they're also going to be very tactful when they're telling you the truth. So if I were to ask them if they like my new shoes, they may say something along the lines, well, they fit your personality. They're very you, right? So they're not saying that they don't like my shoes, but they're also not telling me that they hate them. They're like, oh, those are very you.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. I was thinking too, I guess I kind of almost shorten it sometimes. I say like with the ineffective style, so passive aggressive, passive aggressive. Passive people, their needs don't get met, the other person's does. Aggressive, the aggressor's needs get met, the other person does not. And in passive aggressive, nobody needs get met because nobody really knows what they're working with. You know, like, has anybody ever been fine when they say, I'm fine? No one's ever been well. That's passive aggressive 101. If somebody says they're fine, I would say with clients, I'm like, you know what fine means? I say fine means fucked up, insecure, neurotic, and emotional. So when somebody says I'm fine, I'm always like, yeah, I bet you are. You're fine, aren't you?
That's interesting. I use a different acronym with my clients. I say it's feelings I'm not expressing. If I say, how are you doing, or how was your week? Fine. Feelings I'm not expressing. Why don't you tell me how your week actually was?
Yeah, I feel like that's like the poster child for passive aggressive. It's just, I'm fine. You know, that's never been true for any person to actually be fine.
Yeah. Well, I think passive folks will say fine a lot too. They don't want to turn the spotlight onto them and make the conversation about them and talk about maybe how tough of a week they're having.
So still kind of that stuffing where maybe the passive aggressor does it more of like a sidestepping of like read between the lines and know what I'm saying.
Yeah.
But the passive person is maybe doing it to just not get more attention put on themselves.
Passive aggressive nonverbals, I would say, are probably going to be more convincing when they're saying fine, right? So they're smiling, they have maybe more energetic energy. And I imagine the passive aggressive person is saying fine, but all of their nonverbals are saying they're not fine. That's where that disconnect is happening, right? So it's like, it was fine. Like, it doesn't really sound like your week was fine. They want you to ask, but they don't want to actually just fess up and tell you that they had a shitty week.
Yeah. In therapy, we call that affect incongruent. So what somebody is saying and then what they're demonstrating doesn't line up. And whenever, as a therapist, when you notice that, you're like, gold mine, let me jump on that. But as like a general communicator, we kind of intuitively know, like, that's not really cohesive there. Like it throws us off. And I think dealing with a passive aggressive person is very confusing, you know, because there is that disconnect there. So in this caveat, we have 4 communication styles. We happen to have 4 characters involved. How would you kind of slot these different participants into the communication style convo?
I would say the man in line is our passive communicator. He gets confronted and he doesn't say anything. He just kind of huffs and takes his kids and walks away. His needs aren't getting met. He was in that queue for food. He didn't order his food. He didn't pick up food. He just took his kids. God knows how long they were waiting in this line. He just took them and walked off.
So he left with his needs unmet because he just left the line and still was hungry.
Yep. And then I would say maybe the only thing that's not really congruent with passivity there is he kind of glared at her. And I think somebody who's like to a T, like 10 out of 10 passive, isn't going to do the glare because that puts you at risk for confrontation. They might say something else smart in response to the glare, right?
Yeah.
But I would say he's about a 9 out of 10 passive in this encounter.
Okay. A little smidgen of passive aggressive nonverbals there at the end. Maybe.
Yes. Yeah. Like that one point there.
Yeah, that's fair. I feel you on that one.
Next is aggressive. So I would say the abrasive woman at the end who just randomly approached her was aggressive. She was trying to educate, but the message was lost because of the way she presented it. She said, your behavior was atrocious. In some cultures, what he did was normal. You're racist, disrespectful, extremely rude. Nobody's actually going to listen to your message when you come at them in an aggressive manner because they feel attacked. So their shield's going to go up. They're no longer listening to you. They're either tuning you out or they're mentally preparing their defense.
Yep. And I would suspect too, the only outcome this Karen would have been open to would have been somebody saying, you're right. Yep. I messed up bad. You're totally in the right on that. Versus I don't think that, she would have left being like, I learned a lot about other people today. And that was a great conversation. It's like a single intention of like being heard and understood.
Which is very natural for the aggressive communicator. Yep. They want that validation of somebody saying, I agree with you. You changed my mind. Now I'm on your side. You're right.
Yeah. What a douche. So who would be our passive aggressive person?
Passive aggressive has to be the OP, the author.
For sure.
What she really needs is more space. She needs her physical boundaries respected. But she doesn't ask for that. Nowhere in there does she say, can you please take a step back? Or do you mind, moving your child away so I could pay and access the card reader that he's blocking? Nope. Yeah. It's just, you're in such a hurry and you can't give me space. Why don't you just go ahead of me?
Yeah. Imagine being a stranger interacting with another stranger and a stranger being like, I know what it is and why you're doing this. And like assuming intentions like that, I think is so passive aggressive and obviously inaccurate, but really confusing for the other person to respond to as well.
Yes. Absolutely. And I think that's where like passivity plays a part because a lot of times we think of the passive person as more of an internalizer. And so having that internal world where we're trying to assign reason to everything.
Yeah.
Why'd they say it like that? Why'd they take that tone of voice? Right. You're just like noticing things and then asking yourself, why'd they do that? Passive person is usually going to keep that to themselves and ruminate on it.
Or so like you're saying the passive person might be more inclined to like overthinking.
Yes.
And even kind of trying to make sense of something without really having access to more data on the back end. They're going to have to come up with their own answers to that.
Yes. So when she's kind of assigning blame or assigning reason for why he's standing so close, like you're just in a hurry, I think that is tied to that passive piece of that style.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. Yep. I think you're right about that. And then, so the last one, which would be kind of the ideal communication style, is assertive. Who's assertive in this one?
So we don't have a lot of information about this character, but from the few, like 2 sentences we do have, I'm going to give this to their husband. When they asked their husband for their opinion, he said, well, I understand your frustration. So he's validating her emotion. He's not going straight into problem solving. He's not being judgmental. I understand why you're frustrated. He goes on to say, it did cause a bit of a scene, and you could have just asked him to back up a bit rather than embarrass him. So he didn't be really passive and just agree with her and say, no, I think you were totally in the right. He didn't go off and yell at her like an aggressor, like, oh my God, you just embarrassed us. Get the kids. We're leaving right now. I can't even stand to be here with you. Everybody's looking at us. He didn't do some like sideways passive aggressive comment.
Or, oh, wow, great job handling that.
With the sarcasm.
Yeah. And so, I said that too. Like, I like that he didn't he didn't even step in to intervene with the Karen. He let that play out, and he didn't apologize to anybody on behalf of his wife. He just said,
oh, yeah.
And he was kind of empathetic too, or maybe she was implying this, but the word embarrass came up. So that implies, hey, if I was that person, I might feel embarrassed.
Yeah.
So he's kind of almost making assumptions on the good end, which is like empathizing, and I think that
Very
shows
true.
that he's thinking both from her perspective and the perspective of the other participants as well. Yeah. So what do you think could have been done differently here?
I think a lot could have been done differently.
So where do we start, huh?
I don't know. Break it down by person, I guess.
Yeah. Let's go chronologically, maybe.
Okay.
So it sounds like maybe the first point, I guess, was when she realized that they were really close to her, and she moved up in the line, and they continued with that same distance. That's when I would probably think that was the first opportunity to do something different. What do you think maybe could have been a better way to handle that?
Better way would be to use my voice and just ask him to give me a little bit of space and say, hey, I know we're inching up in line, and the natural progression is I move up, you move up, and I'm feeling a little boxed in, a little claustrophobic. So I'm gonna move up. If you mind just staying put, I need a little bit of breathing space.
Okay. See, and it sounds like because this person's a stranger, we don't want to assume intentions. Would you be kind of gentle in how you would share about that boundary?
Yes. I think I would always be gentle with a stranger, because they could be really nice. They could be passive. They could be closet psycho killer, right? I don't want to be on their hit list because I asked them to take a step back meanly in IKEA.
Or Dexter behind us or something like that. Yeah. I was thinking, when we're looking up when this post was. This was 5 months ago. So this isn't a post-COVID world, right? Where I think personal space is more agreed upon now. But I think there was a scenario. I was in like some kind of convenience store, and there was this person really close to me. And I remember feeling like, oh, this is making me uncomfortable. And I just turned around and I said, you're very close to me. I guess that wasn't more of like an observation, maybe not so much a boundary. And this person said, oh, I'm sorry. Oh, it's okay. And this person stepped back, and that's probably more of an observation more so than a boundary. But that's all it took for that person.
Yeah. What kind of communication style do you say making observations are?
Well, I think observation would almost be passive. But I did say something. So, I guess, again, passive aggressive, I guess might have been in the middle there. I don't know. I think I was also to the point where if he didn't back up, I wasn't going to freak out. So I don't think I felt, like, wow, this is a really thing that I really need to enforce right now. It was just kind of like, I don't know if you're aware, but like, you're awfully close to me, I guess is kind of what I was saying. Just if you'd like to, if not, I'll tolerate it. But like, you're pretty close. I don't know. Was that a little passive aggressive? That's what I'm thinking you're thinking.
I would think if you were my client and you brought this to session and asked me, like, what communication do you think this was? I would say passive aggressive. And I would also then tell you it's a win. If you're naturally passive, we used our voice a little bit. If we're naturally aggressive, we weren't super abrasive. So I would then validate my client and say, well, it's a win. There was some growth. We stepped outside of our comfort zone. Yeah. And there's still a few more steps we need to take.
I am naturally aggressive.
Really? Wouldn't guess that.
You wouldn't guess it. Yeah, I definitely have to control myself for sure. Well, I guess maybe I was thinking because my needs did get met. That person did back up. Right. So I guess it could have been passive aggressive, but it seemed to work in that way of knowing what I was saying. And that's a good point, right? So we get into what is it like to interact with a passive aggressive person, like to be in a relationship with one like that, do you think?
I think it would be exhausting.
Yeah, I think
it's almost double-edged sword. You always feel like you're in this lose-lose because you think you're meeting their needs, but then you're not meeting their needs because they're not actually telling you what they need.
Yeah. And I guess this could also be aggressive, but I always kind of think of passive aggressive as being manipulative. Also, it's almost like an airing out of thought errors, So I think, people will say things like, well, I'm just not going to say anything then. Or it's get really hyperbolic, or, I'm just going to go. I don't know. I feel like a lot of things can come up where again, it's like, well, I'm not saying that, or I'm just a big piece of shit then. I just suck, right? It's like, whoa, that's not okay, not helpful, and I think that can come up a lot too. It's kind of that manipulative pattern.
Yes.
Aggressors I think all of them like manipulation, though. I don't know. What do you think? Aggressors, they can be. I'm thinking like an abuser.
Mm-hmm. I don't necessarily. I think the one I'm having most difficult with identifying some manipulation is with passive folks. If there is manipulation, I think it's maybe unintentional because their end goal is to keep the peace and to please others and to just kind of skate under the radar.
Yeah. Yeah.
But what will happen is they're going to probably keep tally. And that's
Just
maybe where the manipulation is, right? So they're keeping score in their head of all these times you've slighted them. And then when they hit their breaking point, as we've discussed in similar previous posts, now they're exploding about shit that happened 6 months ago. And you're like, fuck, this is 6 months ago. I thought we were done and over with. But they've been keeping score until they have just enough anger bottled up that they can use their voice.
Yeah, I think a lot of like martyrdom comes from that too. You know? Yeah, I think you're right about that.
But yeah. The other thing I would do is maybe just tolerate it. Because apart from the kid being on the card reader, that small 10-minute, if it's a really long line, right? That small 10 minutes of my life isn't really worth getting worked up over. I'm really big on allocating my energy. I only have so much energy, and I'm not going to really allocate to 10 minutes. I can tolerate that distress that you're a bit close to me.
Yeah, unless there's not like safety concerns, right? Where somebody's, you're like, oh God, yeah, excuse me, excuse me, I need to pay with my card. Something like that could have been done, and she just could have said, hey, this is going to go on for 10 minutes. Like, then I'll go eat my food and move on with my day.
Yeah,
pick your battles thing. Yeah, right. So the first part was saying, okay, there's a boundary for some kind of personal space. It sounds like the second maybe opportunity to do things differently. Do you think that'd be like kind of the interaction with the cashier? Or what do you think would be kind of the next point of like, oh, that's another mistake that was made?
In an ideal world, yeah, I would not apologize to the cashier. I think that was a bit
shitty,
unnecessary.
Right? I know, to apologize for somebody else. Yeah.
But again, if a client's trying to make growth and they fixed everything but that, I'm just not going to even touch it. I'm going to breeze over that. And we're going to go to the next part of our conversation in the session.
Right. We're talking about like baseline, right? Like, where do we start at?
Where are we starting at? Yeah.
Gosh. So say for whatever reason you were in an IKEA with your kids, you were lacking some spatial awareness, somebody called you out in a really passive aggressive way. What do you think the male and his family could have done differently?
I would have apologized and taken a step back and stayed in line and got my kids some food. Because at the end of the day, like, feeding my children aren't going to trump your physical boundary needs. Sorry, that's just how it works out.
Yeah.
Right? So I'm gonna stay in line and I'm gonna get them some food. And if I'm being really petty, I might take her up on her offer and go ahead of her in line and be like, gee, thanks.
See, like, that might be something I might kind of do that too. Sometimes I'll be like, well, if someone's going to be passive aggressive, I'm not going to give into that. You're going to lose. It's, again, I'm inclined towards being a little aggressive, right?
You don't want them to win. You want to win.
Yeah, I'm going to teach you a lesson for sure. Do you think, would you have known that she was wanting an apology, or would you have known, like, I don't know. I guess you'd have to be kind of plugged into that person a bit, but I'd be like, what? I don't know. That'd be so confusing to me.
An apology as far as the cashier would want an apology?
No, I was thinking, like, if I was the guy and somebody had said, obviously you're in such a rush, I would probably be like, I'm not in a rush, like, whatever. I don't know if I'd be like, oh my God, I'm obviously standing too close to you. That must be what you're insinuating. I'm so sorry. Would you? Maybe you would. I think we're like pretty emotionally intelligent, but
I think just based off of how she said it, I'm trying to find it now as I'm reading through it, and I can't find her exact words, but it's something along the lines of, since you're in such a hurry and can't allow me to have my turn. I think I would perceive from that she felt like I was creeping up in line.
Crowding her. Yeah.
Or even at that point noticed my kid was actually in front of her at the card reader.
Yeah. It would have been like a check-in moment of like, let me look at all my people. I'm like, oh yeah, my people are way too close to this other person. And you would have read like, okay, too close. Okay. So you would have said, oh, my apologies. Kids, come here. Yeah. Just kind of wrangle everybody back in, apologize, and just be that. That would be appropriate. Okay, so the Karen is aggressive. If maybe she felt she was, being a social justice warrior in this moment, and obviously she's assuming intention, like she's assuming the author responded to this person because of some kind of demographic information. But if she felt convicted in that, how would you maybe engage in a protecting somebody from a bully moment?
I would start this off by being calm. She's obviously very passionate about social justice and racial equality, enough to butt into other people's affairs. So when you're that passionate about things, I think it's natural that your energy levels rise with that.
Yeah.
So her energy is already pretty high. So she's obviously going to lead more towards a passive aggressive or aggressive communication style, especially if one of those two are her dominant or default styles.
Yeah. Because she's amped up, right? So she's
all of that to say she's amped up.
Because she's passionate. She's not going to come in there and be passive, right? Because you can't really be passive and passionate, maybe in how you're speaking, kind of. Okay,
correct. I go in and I just say, hey, do you mind if I talk to you for just a quick moment? I know you're here with your family eating. I just wanted to give you some unsolicited feedback on the interaction I witnessed with you in line. I understand you maybe felt out of sorts or that your physical boundaries were being disrespected in that moment. But I also think there were nicer ways to handle that and different things to consider. You were thinking from your perspective in that moment. You didn't stop to think maybe that is normal physical space boundaries for him. So I just wanted to leave that for food for thought. I don't need a response. I don't need you to agree with me. I'm just hoping you will take that and consider that in your future interactions with strangers.
Yeah, I like to even leave it like that, because you're kind of saying, like, I don't need a back and forth. I'm really saying neither one of us is here to be talked out of our thoughts, almost too. And just say, just food for thought. Just throw it out there, take it or leave it. I felt the need to do that. Something. Would you ever do something like that, you think?
Probably not. My natural communication style is passive.
Really? Again, I'm surprised. I know it's really hard to be aggressive. Surprises me.
I work really hard to try and stay assertive. And I think if I come out of passivity, I go straight to passive aggressive. I'm like super petty Betty all the time.
Gotcha.
So I haven't quite grown to like a default of assertive. I work really hard at that.
Okay, man, learning something new about you. Yeah, I get mad. So I get aggressive. But I'm working on it. I get
mad too. I just hold that shit in.
Yeah. And speaking of assertive, I think I like the husband, because I'm a big fan of when somebody's learning assertive communication. My first step is like iMessages. That's always where I start. So just kind of summarize for you guys. So you're sharing something that you think, feel, or that you need or want. So I like that he leads with kind of like saying, hey, before we even get rolling, I get where you're coming from. That was frustrating or made you uncomfortable or whatever. And then also, I think it was kind of hard to watch that, right? That made me feel uncomfortable to watch my spouse participate in that. And I think there was better ways of handling that in the future, and I think just saying, hey, this is my response to what I observed happening. And this is what I would like to go differently if we find ourselves in the same situation. Yeah.
It's interesting, as you were saying that, the thought popped up for me that perhaps by saying you did embarrass him a little bit, I'm curious if he was projecting that and he was actually embarrassed and he just didn't want to say that she embarrassed him.
Yeah. So he's saying, oh, I'm embarrassed for the other person, but also he's like, I'm kind of mortified that you just did this and this. IKEA.
Yes, that I'm the person sitting at the table that you walked to after that.
Yeah, that's so true. And that's hard to tolerate your spouse acting a fool, because you do kind of like, you see each other as a unit, but to not like protect them from their feelings or to try to manage them in that, I think is difficult, Yeah.
How would you handle a spouse like her?
Oh man. Yeah, I'd like to think that I'd be really tactful and assertive, but I'm trying to think. So, for myself, actually, so my husband, I think I'd say something like, that was embarrassing. I think maybe I'd probably be inclined to maybe take it a little bit personal. or to think about that. But I mean, I'm pretty open to talking about my emotions. So I think I'd probably say something like, that was really embarrassing. I suspect based on what I know about you that you thought that was kind of mean. I don't think you would like to be treated that way. And you kind of made a scene. And I wish that today did not play out that way. Is probably what I would say.
That's so nice. That's not what I was thinking at all.
What are you thinking? Oh man.
I started off the same in my head as you of that was embarrassing.
Yeah.
But then I went to, I'm not going to go out into public with you if you keep acting like that.
Yeah, but that's a boundary, right?
Yes, I would go straight to boundary setting. Like, I'm not doing this shit with you every time we go in public.
Yeah. My first thought might be like, are you sober? Like, but assuming that there was, again, like, oh, is she like regularly like being like a total douchebag in public? Again, we don't know if this is happening regularly. I definitely think that setting a boundary is astute need, if this was a one-off, I think it's okay being like, you done fucked up a bit, we're gonna move on, but like not my favorite. Yeah.
So you're so much nicer. I think even if it was the first time, I say like nip it in the butt early on.
Yeah, I don't know, like when I'm interacting with this is probably just because I'm a therapist and have words for it. When I'm interacting with a passive aggressive person, I just kind of say that was very passive aggressive, or like that was kind of manipulative and not helpful, or that was hyperbolic. I just kind of like just label the behavior. I don't know that person necessarily knows what to do with that, but that's just kind of, I guess I've gotten kind of lazy of like, I'm not even fucking around with this passive aggression. I know what I'm looking at and I'm not down for it, and I just like, you can kind of pick up when somebody's doing that because you're just like, what are you doing, man?
How's that work for you? How does like a passive aggressive person take to being called out on their passive aggression?
I usually stop. I mean, like that they'll try a different route normally, but I think it can probably be kind of, I guess it's changed over time. Like depends on if it's the same person I'm interacting with, the behavior changes over time to where I think we just become more direct and they know what I'm doing and they just move on. But they usually do switch tactics after if I just call it. But I think at first it is kind of confusing or frustrating because they might not necessarily know what else to do, but they are aware that you're like aware of them,
Got it.
So I don't know if you were to fight with somebody and they started calling out your shit, what would you do? They're just calling out your patterns.
God, I guess I would like to think I would stop, but I honestly just don't know. I might just flee.
Because you're passive.
Yeah. Because I'm passive. I might just avoid and be like, fuck off and walk away.
Yeah.
Get like one little jab in.
I'm trying to think.
Or I might apologize and be like, oh, that wasn't how I intended it.
I think when people call me out, I usually say like, that's fair. I think it really makes me stop and to say, that's probably true. Like they probably are right. They had a word for what I was doing. So I probably was doing that thing, but like when somebody says, that's not really fair, that seems extreme, or that's not every time, I'm like, all right, you're right about that. I find it almost can kind of like de-escalate a conflict sometimes. If it's not, you're a bad person for saying this, or I'm not participating like the argument volley and I'm just calling it what it is and letting that hang out into space, So I think it almost has become like a de-escalation technique, but I think that could really frustrate people too. I can see that going a different way. It hasn't really, but I can see it being that way, I
was curious about that. How people responded to being called out on their shit.
Yeah. And this is me calling out people like that I know very well. Right. So I'm not going to do this to a stranger, but like if it's my partner, or like my parents or like my siblings or a friend, even, I might say like, just call it what that is and we move on,
Got it.
Being in a relationship with a therapist has got to be really shitty.
Imagine.
I'm so glad I'm not, huh? Yeah. Oh man. Yeah, that'd be hard.
What would you say takeaways are?
The takeaways are there's 4 main communication styles. 3 of them are ineffective. So they are passive aggressive, and assertive. The variances come down to how effectively you're able to communicate your needs. I think, iMessages are a good part of assertive communication, talking about your feelings and not apologizing for other people, staying in your lane, generally speaking, is good practice.
Yeah. All right. Hope you guys found this helpful. Hopefully This will be some food for thought for you guys as you have your next interactions, either with strangers or people you know and love. Either way, we want to know your thoughts. Send them to us at the ASSertive Podcast. There's no the on that. ASSertive Podcast. ASSertive Podcast at gmail.com. And we will see you guys next time.